What's up guys, it's Brad from LightArchitect here. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can add falling snow to pretty much any shot or 3D render inside of Blender. This is a super simple and effective technique that you can use to add a little bit more cinematic look for your shots. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to Inspiration Tuts on YouTube. Inspiration Tuts does a variety of computer graphics videos and covers a lot of recent updates and topics on Blender as well. A few weeks ago, he did a video on 12 Blender add-ons for simulations and dynamics, and included both our Chaos Explosion add-on as well as our Spiderfy add-on for Blender. So be sure to check out his channel if you're interested in these kind of videos. Also, if you're interested, as you probably know, we just released our Weather Effects add-on for Blender. Weather Effects is a very simple add-on you can use to add various weather particle systems to your scene fairly quickly. You can add rain, heavy hail, or snow to your scene in a matter of seconds. Weather Effects is available on Blender Market, so if you're interested in that as well, feel free to check it out there. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. This is where we're going to start off our scene creation project. As you can see, I just have a very basic camera here, and on the left side we just have our 3D scene setup, and then on the right panel here I just have our camera view set up for us as well. And I've just imported this footage of a rugby game here, and we're just going to try to add some snow falling in the shot in the foreground. But anyways, to start, the first thing we're going to do is create our snow particle, and since our snow is going to be fairly small, it's not going to be a close-up render of the snow. We don't need to be really precise with the material. However, we do want to have a little bit of variation in the shape. So what I'm going to do to create our snow material first is I'll press Shift A. I'll add a very basic icosphere to our scene, and this is probably good enough detail. If you want more detail when we add displacement, you could increase the subdivisions here, but I think 2 should be just fine for the sake of this tutorial. Now what we want to do is we want to create a snow material for this icosphere, because this is going to be our snowflake that we're going to instance on a particle system. So I'll go to our shading tab and I'll go to rendered view. And before we start with our new material, I want to just add an HDRI to our scene so we can see better how our material is going to look. So I'll just go to our world tab here. I'll add a environment texture, go to open, and then just load up an HDRI that I have saved. And then I'll just bring down the strength to maybe 0.5 to darken it a little bit. So something like this. And then I'll go to our render properties, and under film, I'll click the transparent option so we can just see it with an alpha channel in the background. Alright, so to create a material, I'll just click on the new button here. And the first thing we want to do is add some noise to our shader here. So I'll press Shift A, I'll add a texture, Voronoi texture. And then I'm going to connect the distance output of our Voronoi texture to the base color of our principled BSDF shader. And now you can see we have some variation in our snow particle. And before we continue, I actually want to make our snow particle shaded smooth, so it's not quite as jagged. And we have some large scale variation in color here, but what I want to do is I want to add some small scale variation as well. So I'm going to actually just duplicate our Voronoi texture here. I'll press Shift D while it is selected and duplicate it, and then I'll press Shift A. I'll add a color mix RGB. I'll add this to our Voronoi texture here, and then I'll connect the second Voronoi texture to the second color input of our mix node here. And then I want to bring down the scale of this second Voronoi texture, so maybe 2. Well, actually we want to maybe increase this, so maybe I'll try something like 30 for the scale. And there we go. See, now you can see that there's some smaller scale detail on our snow texture as well, mixed with our main Voronoi texture here that we added initially. So I actually might increase this a little more, maybe increase the scale to 40. So something like this should be pretty good for some variation in color of our snowflake. Now one thing I want to do is actually make our snowflake a little bit cooler. Right now it's just kind of totally white or black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A. I'll add a converter color ramp. Then I'll add this right before our base color input for our principled BSDF shader. And then for the black portion of our color ramp here, I'll just make it a little bit blue. And as you can see, the darker portion of our noise here is becoming a little bit blue, which is kind of nice for a snow effect. And one more thing I want to do is add a little bit of bump to our material here. So what I might do is take the color input of our mix shader and add it to our normal input. And it kind of messes up our shader right now because we need to convert our color values so that they can work in our normal input. So what I'll do is I'll press Shift A. I'll add a vector bump. Then I'll add this right here. And I actually want to move this to our height input. And now as you can see here, we have some bumps on our shader. And I might just decrease the strength here to maybe 0.2. Now as you can see here, that bump map is much more subtle. And this is a pretty nice looking snow material. It won't work when we're really close, but just for a particle system, this should work pretty good. One final thing I might do is just bring down the roughness here so that we get a little bit of shine on the edge of our material, and it's not totally just a diffused material. So maybe 0.1 roughness, and I think this will be pretty good. All right, so one more thing I want to do before we instance this on a custom particle system is I want to just vary the shape of our snow particle here. So I'll just go back to layout mode here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our modifier properties tab here. I'm going to add a displacement modifier, and then I'm going to add a new texture, and then go to our texture tab. And then what I want to do is I want to use a maybe a marble texture, and you know, add some variation to the shape here. Might dial it back a little bit so it's not quite as heavy, something like that. But you can kind of play around with different types of textures here to give the snow a little bit of variation. And as I mentioned, if you have more vertices, the different types of textures will affect it differently. But this should be just fine. If I just go to rendered view, we can kind of see what we're getting. It's just kind of a nice little snow particle. And as long as it's not right next to the camera, it should work just fine. You can also maybe use a magic texture. It's not bad. I like the magic texture displacement map better, so I'm going to go with this one. But one thing we want to do is create a few different snow particles with different shapes so that not all of the snow particles are the same on our particle system. So what I'll do is I'll press Shift D, I'll duplicate this, and then I'll duplicate the texture on this snow particle and maybe just play with the turbulence a bit to give it a slightly different shape. And then I will press Shift D again, duplicate it once more, duplicate the texture again, and then, you know, play around with the turbulence once more and maybe scale it down a bit. So now we have kind of some variation in our particles. All right, so I'll go ahead and name each of our icospheres here. So I'll call this Snow 1, I'll call this one Snow 2, and then I'll call this one Snow 3. And then I'll select all three of them by holding Shift down, and then I'm going to press M, add it to a new collection, and we'll just call this Snow Particles. So now we have all three of these snow pieces in their own collection here. So now we can use that collection to instance them over our particle system. All right, so I'll just bring these down on the Z-axis so they're out of the way for now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add our particle system. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A, I'll add a plane, I'll scale it up here and add it above our scene where our camera is, and then I'll go to our particle system tab here, add a new particle system, and as you can see, if I play through our scene, we're getting this kind of rainy effect, but we want to obviously adjust the behavior of these particles so they look a bit more like snow. So first I will go to our velocity tab and I will bring the normal velocity down to 0 so they don't go up when they first start off in our scene. So now they're just dropping directly from the plane here, and then I'm going to give it a little bit of random velocity, so I'll press 1 maybe. Now there's a little bit of randomness. As you can see, they're kind of emitting in different directions on the top here. And one thing I want to do is increase the lifetime of our particles. So maybe to 300. Again, it kind of depends on the length of your timeline and how long you want them to live, but this should be just fine. Then I'll also make the end frame of our emission 300 as well. And of course, we can add more particles later. And I actually might change the frame start to -100 so that they start already in our scene here. Let's try -300 actually. There we go. All right, so this is a nice start. I might adjust our plane here so that they're going by our camera here in the foreground a little more. And scale it up so that it covers our entire scene. So this should be pretty good. Now we want to give the snow a little bit of random movement. So it looks like the wind is dragging them and giving them a little bit of random movement like snow has in reality. So there are a few different ways to do this. One way to do this is going to the physics tab of your particle system and increasing the drag on your particle system. So I'll bring that to 1. And then I might also add a little bit of dampening to our particle system as well to make them drop a little bit slower. So maybe 0.2. And now as you can see here, the particles are moving much slower. Might be a little bit too slow, so I might do 0.1 instead. And now that's looking quite a bit better. I might even try 0.06. And it kind of depends on how fast you want your snow to move, but this should be pretty good, I think. So now what we want to do is add some of that random movement to our snow particles. So we could use the Brownian motion here. So increase this to maybe 2 or 3 at first, or maybe more. Let's going to introduce some random movement to our particles if we increase it enough. Try 20. And you can kind of see they're going back and forth a little bit. It's not doing very much. Let's see if I increase it to 100, what happens. All right, so if we increase it to 100, you'll notice that there's a lot more random motion going on here, but it's a little bit too much. So there's a happy medium, obviously, on how much randomness you want. 100 is obviously too much, so maybe try 50. And I'd say 50 looks pretty good. So this is one way you can add some random motion to your particle system to create that snowfall effect. One other way to do this is by adding a turbulence field. So I'll go ahead and bring the Brownian motion down to 0, and then I'll press Shift A. I'll add a force field, turbulence, and then I'll just go to our physics properties tab here and increase the strength of our force field a bit. Increase it even more to create a drastic result. There we go. And now, as you can see here, our particles are doing kind of a similar effect here. So I might bring this down to maybe 54. And then the cool thing about using the turbulence force field is that you can also change the size of the force field, which changes how much the particles move back and forth. So if we increase the size, the particles will have a bigger distance to fall before they go back and forth. If I go to maybe increase the size to 2, and you'll see that they're moving back and forth at a bigger distance. So this is kind of something you just have to play around with depending on the look you're going for and your specific scene. But I think this is looking pretty good. This is looking kind of like snow here. So now to finalize the scene setup here, what I want to do is instance our snow particles on this particle system and then add a ground plane as a holdout so that the snow isn't rendered beyond the ground here. So let's go ahead and select our snow particle system. I'll go to our particle settings, and then under render, instead of rendering our particles as a halo like we see here, we want to switch this over to collection, and then we'll instance our snow particle collection. And now, as you can see here, if I play through our scene, actually in our view layer tab here, our plane is also in our snow particles collection here. So I'll move this to our main scene collection. And now, as you can see here, our snow particles are showing up. All right. Before we adjust anything, I might scroll up here and just add some more particles to our particle system. So maybe 4,000, something like that. So there are a few more particles in our scene. And then I'll scroll down here to the render panel here, and I might decrease the scale of our snow here just because some of the particles are a little bit big right next to the camera here. So I might try something like 0.02, and now they're a little bit smaller. And then under scale randomness, I'll increase this to 0.65, just so there's a little bit of randomness in the snow particles. And I might increase the scale back to 0.03. So something like this is pretty nice. At this point, it's just kind of a matter of experimentation here. If I play through our timeline, they have a nice random look to them. And as you can see, if I go to rendered view here, you'll notice what we're getting. Our snow particles are showing up nicely in our scene here. They're not very bright, so what I might do is go to our world settings here, increase this back to 1. So now we can see them a bit better in our scene. And we could also add some backlight similar to our live action shot here to bring them out in our environment a bit better as well. But I think this should be just fine. I'll select our snow particle system here, and under the particle settings, I want to make sure that the show emitter option is deselected so we don't actually render the plane emitting the particles. And then I'll bring it up here so it's not in view of our camera. And yeah, I'd say this is looking pretty solid. So finally, one more thing I want to do is add a ground plane that is a holdout so that the snow particles aren't being rendered once they pass the ground here. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A. I'll add a plane here and just scale it up. And we actually, once again, added it to our snow particles collection. So I'll just move this to our main scene collection. And I just want to add this where our ground would be in our scene. We'll just scale it up so it's like a ground plane. Something like that should be just fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to its own collection. So I'll press M, new collection, and then call it ground holdout. Okay. Now I'm going to go to our filter options here, turn all of our restriction toggles on, and then for our holdout collection, I will enable holdout. And now any snow that passes behind our ground plane here will be hidden from our render. All right, so finally, before doing a test render and getting into the compositing process, I'm going to select our snow particle system here and bake our cache. So before we do that, we want to save our scene. So I'll go ahead and do File, Save As. We'll call it Snow Tutorial. Save it. And then I'm going to click on bake and give Blender a few seconds here to bake our particle system so we don't have to run through it from the beginning every time. And now all of our frames for our particle system are baked, and I'll just choose a frame here to render out our particle system. I'll choose frame 51 here, and let's do a quick test render. So I'll go to our render properties tab here. For our sampling, I'll choose 40 samples. For advanced, I'll select the seed stopwatch for some noise variation and add a little bit of motion blur probably, so check that checkbox. For shutter, I'll bring this down to maybe 0.35, and this should be pretty good. So I'll go ahead and close our window here, combine our tabs, go to viewpoint camera on this window, and I'll just go to render and render image, and let's see what Blender gives us for a composite. Alright guys, so this is our test render here, and it's looking pretty cool. It's looking like snow. As you can see, the variation and the shape of our particles is looking nicely here. However, we do need to add it to our background, so I'll go ahead and close our render tab here and go to the compositing tab, and I'll select the use nodes option at the top left, and let's start compositing our snow element with our live action shot. So on the left side here, we have our view layer that contains our snow element. So what I want to do is add a viewer output so that we can see what we're working with in our compositor. So I'll press Shift A, add an output viewer, and then I'll just take our image from our render layer into this viewer, and now we can see what we're getting so far. So now what we want to do is we want to add our movie clip to the background here. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A, I'll add an input movie clip, and I will select our movie clip here, and we want to press Shift A, add an alpha over node here, and then we want to connect our image input from our movie clip to this alpha over node with our snow overlaid on top of it. And right now we have them flipped, so I'll just grab this bottom one, move it to the top one, and now as you can see here, we have some snow overlaid on top of our scene. And I'll connect this image output to our composite as well. And one thing I want to do is add a transform node here for our movie clip. So I'll press Shift A, distort, scale, and I want to make this the render size. And that's just so if we don't render at 100%, it'll still fit our composite here. All right, so this is looking okay, but we do need to blend it into our shot a bit. So to do this in the most simple way, I'll just add some color correction in between our snow layer and our alpha over node. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A. I'll add a RGB curves, and our snow is a little bit bright right now, so I might just dial it back a little bit. And it's also a little bit blue, so I might go to the blue channel here, just dial back the amount of blue on it, and already we're looking a little bit nicer here. It's also a little bit too big in my opinion, but you know, feel free to adjust the render size in your particle settings. I might press Shift A and add a filter blur and check bokeh blur, increase the X and Y by 2, so there's just a little bit of blur on our snow elements, and it's still a little bit blue for me, so I might just bring it back a little bit here. Go to the green channel, just trying to match it to our live action as best we can. I think the main issue in my opinion is just the size of some of these snow particles here, just a little bit much, but I'm gonna try to adjust what I can in the compositor for now. There we go. Actually, if I decrease the brightness, it helps as well. I might also want to just decrease the alpha over node factor here so that there's a little bit of translucency in our snow particles. So maybe just dial this back a little bit, bring down the levels a bit. It's just a matter of color correcting your snow at this point to match your live action, which can be tricky at times. I might press Shift A, add another color correction, color balance node here, and then just warm up our snow a bit so it's not so cold here. And yeah, as far as compositing goes, this is looking all right. One more thing I might do is just bring down the size of our particles a bit, so it's just not so large here. This one's in the distance, and it shouldn't really be that big in my opinion. So I'll go to layout mode here and adjust a few of our particle settings. Go back to our particle settings tab. I'll delete the bake. I'll decrease the scale to maybe 0.02. Then increase the scale randomness, and then I'll increase the number of our particles as well to maybe 6,000, so there are quite a bit more particles. Then I'll bake it once more, and I still think we need a little bit more particles, so I'll delete the bake once more, maybe do 10,000. Depending on your computer, you may want to use some children particles. Alright, so I think this is going to look pretty good here. I'll go ahead and do one more render here. I'll go to render and render image, and let's see what we get. Alright, so this is looking a little bit nicer. As you can see, the particles aren't quite as big and they're blending into our environment a bit better. They're a little bit too green in my opinion, so I'll just go to our compositing tab and just clean that up a bit. make them more cold as opposed to before. And I'd say that's looking pretty good. Anyways, guys, that is how you can add some snow particle effects to pretty much any shot of your choice inside of Blender. I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.